I'm David Sax, the author of The Future is Analog, How to Create a More Human World, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with David Sax about his book, The Future is Analog, How to Create a More Human World, published by PublicAffairs. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button, so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Based in Toronto, Ontario, David Sax is a journalist, writer, and keynote speaker, specializing in business and culture. David's previous book, The Revenge of Analog, Real Things and Why They Matter, a Washington Post bestseller, looked at the resurgence of analog goods and ideas during a time when we assumed digital would conquer all. David's first book, Save the Deli in Search of Perfect Pastrami, Crusty Rye and the Heart of Jewish Delicatessen, won a James Beard Award for Writing and Literature, as well as other awards and praises of deli lovers everywhere. His second book, The Tastemakers, Why We're Crazy for Cronuts but Fed Up with Fondue, chronicled how food trends emerge, grow, and ultimately make a difference in our world. His most recent book, The Future of Analog, How to Create a More Human World, is published by PublicAffairs. In The Future is Analog, this book asks pointed questions. Is our future inevitably digital? Can we reject the downsides of digital technology without rejecting change? Can we innovate not for the sake of productivity, but for the good of our social and cultural lives? Can we build a future that serves us as humans first and foremost? This is a manifesto for a different kind of change. We can spend our creativity and money on building new gadgets, or we can spend them on new ways to be together and experience the world, to bake bread and climb mountains. All we need is the clarity to choose which future we want. So, without further ado, here's my chat with David Sax about his book, The Future is Analog, How to Create a More Human World, published by PublicAffairs. So, David Sax, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
My pleasure. I know we tried to make it work in person, but it didn't work out today because of our schedules.
And I know I've already got one strike against me. We're doing this on Zoom audio.
No, nonsense. I do all my podcasts on Zoom.
Very good. Very good.
Or other forums.
Sure. Well, before I get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
Oh, man. I mean, I got to say Calvin and Hobbes was an obsession. And what's great is that my son found all those old Calvin and Hobbes at my parents' house and has become obsessed with them as well. So I've gotten to reread them and go through them again, with him in the past 2 years.
That's cool. Yeah, it's definitely a big influence in a lot of creators I talk to. They say that work transcends time, I guess you could say, which is really cool. That is cool.
And it is funny because it is so analog. It's like, it's going to the phone and, there's no computer, anything in it.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah. And he's definitely outside playing with Hobbes quite a bit, which is cool. Yeah. That's neat. So we're chatting because a topic of your book, The Future is Analog, is something that I've been slowly discovering in my chats with Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators. And your book really sums it up completely. So maybe you could give us just a quick overview of what is The Future of Analog.
Yeah, this book is sort of the second book I wrote on the topic. So the first book I wrote came out 10 years ago. It was called The Revenge of Analog. And that was looking at why we were seeing a resurgence of non-digital goods and ideas, things like vinyl records coming back and bookstores opening up again and film and so on. And The Future's Analog was really a response to the sort of early days of the pandemic, when this sort of promised future that we've been told about for many years, we're going to be able to do everything remotely from anywhere. You can have any conversation, you can work, you can go to school, you never even need to leave your house. Now that we have digital technology, you can do everything. We very quickly realized the limits of that, how negative that was socially, for our mental health, for education, for so many aspects of our lives. And so that's what that book really reflects, is what we learned during that period of time, whether it was months or years, depending on where you lived. Here in Canada, a lot longer, I think, for a lot of things. They're both sort of on that same trend, which is sort of questioning this inevitability that we've been told about for 20 some years or longer, that with each successive iteration of digital technology, the non-digital things would become irrelevant and useless, and we would sort of evolve away from them into this future that we were destined to. And now you hear it with AI, right? And the reality is shown that that's not the case, that the more digital we're exposed to, the more we see the value of the non-digital things in our world, in our lives, in our work, in our social lives, in education, and in something like comics.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've got to confess, another confession here, another strike against me. Your book is so popular that I couldn't find it on bookshelves. I had to get the digital format. So there we go. Another one against
I
me.
know, but it's not. I think it's the opposite, that it's not popular.
Oh,
It's
no.
hard to find a paper. Yeah. The second one. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do have it, which is good. As we mentioned off the top, you interviewed hundreds of people for your book. I'm wondering, was there a common thread through all of your chats and discoveries?
I certainly have found a common thread, and it's been borne out in conversations, which is that it takes time to sort of realize the limitations of a technology, whether it's an analog technology or digital technology, right? That we always go into things with a preconceived notion of what it's going to be. And we're often sold something, and it really takes a period of use to sort of realize the results of the experiments that we're conducting on ourselves. And I think it's impossible to sort of go into using a technology, whether it's a digital technology or, again, an analog technology, and know what the results are going to be without actually putting it to the test. And I think we've seen that in all sorts of different domains. And I hope we're getting wiser of, to be a little more skeptical and a little more rigorous in how we approach and adapt and use different technologies for whatever it is we're doing. That seems to be a common theme, that regardless of the technology, regardless of the sector, whether it's the internet or whether it's cell phones, whether it's digital cameras, or whether it's digital music, or whether it's AI now, there's the sort of technological possibility, there's a marketing hype, there's utopianism and dystopianism and these expectations that we have, but you don't really know until you've used it. And you don't really know until you've really put some time into it what the results of that are going to be. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this something I want to use? Is it not something I want to use? Do the drawbacks outweigh the positives or vice versa? How is this going to actually fit into my life and work and whatever long term? And what are the consequences of that economically, in terms of the work I do, mental health, all that jazz? You just don't know until it actually, you sort of put the wheels on the road, so to speak.
Right. This happened fairly recently, the move to ban cell phones in schools. And I wanted to ask you if you think this is part of this movement in some way, going back to analog. Although I realize why cell phones were removed. They wanted kids to focus more on education. Social media may be detracting from their studies. Do you think this might be part of this broader movement to go analog?
In a way, yes, but it actually goes into what I was just talking about, right? So ed tech, education technology, is a much bigger field, right? And it's the idea that the more computers we put into schools and classrooms, the more we can streamline education and educate children from kindergarten through to university, a more efficient way, a more personalized way, and a more effective way that's going to get them to learn even better. This is something that, going back to even pre-analog technologies, Thomas Edison talking about recorded sound and film, said that this would do away with books and stuffy classrooms. The company that really pushed it earliest and the most aggressively for many decades was Apple. But then, of course, Dell, Microsoft, everybody sort of got on board, social media companies and so forth. I was just reading in paper The Economist this morning, and there was an article that talked about vast studies across dozens and dozens of countries all over the world over the course of decades that clearly showed that the more digital technology you put into a school, the worse the academic results are. double-blind studies from the US, studies from Canada, studies from Europe, studies from Africa, studies from Asia, studies from every corner of the world, every type of school, public school, private school, elementary school, universities. The fact of the matter is that the experiment was done and the data has come in very conclusively that digital technology in schools is a net negative for education. So the ban on cell phones is, not an ideological thing. It is a data-driven response to, academic performance and the influence of digital devices on it. And, for any of us who were recently students, I mean, I was recently a student 25 years ago, but, I had like a small laptop thing when I was at university 25 years ago, and I would use it to take notes, but I spent a hell of a lot of time playing solitaire on it. Right. And I remember, when they first had, friends whose kids, had Wi-Fi in the classroom, and they're like, yeah, we spend all of our time just surfing the web and killing time. And you see that with phones in classes too. And again, all these schools, whether it was a public school or a university or a private school, were sort of sold this promise that, if you get this advanced technology into the hands of students, that's going to open up all these opportunities of learning and customize it. It just has not proved to be the point. Whether it's the best school in the world, like Stanford, or a high-end private school, or an underfunded public school, wherever it was, whatever the education is, it's just proved to be a detriment because it saps attention. It removes the relationship between students and teacher and students and each other, which is the core of learning. It narrows learning down into a series of sort of games and tests and quizzes, which again can be fun or interesting, but they don't really relate to a greater sense of knowledge and a greater sort of accumulation of understanding about a subject or the world. And it's just proven to be sort of like a very costly bell and whistle that at the end of the day is sort of distracted stuff. So it's not the sort of ideological ranting against it. It's based upon this experiment. And the experiment, again, questions this assumption that digital, because it's newer, because it's, on a computer, because the computers are more powerful in so many other aspects of life, therefore is better. And the more of it we put in, the better it is. And it's not true. It's not the case.
Right. Now, in my discussions with creators, I've found that they're rebelling against it. It all started with subscription-based software. Everything got turned into subscriptions. And more recently against AI that you mentioned in the process of creating art. I'm wondering if you've encountered that in any of your research, in your discussions with a variety of different interviews.
Yeah. I mean, in my first book, The Revenge of Analog, the conversations I had around that sort of creator embrace of analog was with musicians and photographers. Those are the sort of technologies that I was looking at. And so those are the conversations I had. Musicians was a really interesting one. We're talking about, consumption of digital music, streaming versus something like vinyl records or cassette tapes even. But what was interesting with the conversations I had in places like Nashville with musicians and engineers and producers, and they were talking about how bands, musicians, people like Jack White, the Black Keys, Lady Gaga, so on, were going to studios and were producing records with analog technology, which basically means, they were going in and recording songs using microphones that were going direct to tape rather than recording to hard drives where, various filters could add in different effects. So in order to get like an echo effect, they would have to go to a physical echo chamber in a recording studio with a microphone at one end and them standing at the end of a concrete hallway and singing toward that microphone to create this physical echo. And so it's more costly, it's more labor intensive, it takes more time. And if you make mistakes, you can't just undo it by clicking undo as you could in whatever the main recording software is. It's eluding me right now. But the thing is, what you got out of that was a specific sound that was the result of these happy accidents. There was sort of a warmth, quote unquote, of what the sound could be, but it was really like if the tape was hit a little late, or if the reverb was a little imperfect, or if someone's guitar had some feedback to it, or someone's voice warbled because of the way a microphone was set up, that became part of it. That became part of the sound, and that added to the texture and the flavor of the record. And because they were limited in doing certain things, they had to do other things. They had to sort of work around it. And so this is really the thing that people have found, whether it's with photography, whether it's with visual art, whether it's with painting, whether it's with something like drawing as a comic book or graphic arts, novel creator would do. You're limited by the size of the page, but you're not limited by what could go on within it. One of the best conversations I had around this was, this was over a decade ago, this gentleman named John Skidgel, who was working at Google at the time. He was the sort of main user experience and user interface designer at Google. Had worked on YouTube, designed sort of how YouTube looked back in the day. And he had created this course for people working at Google in design, which was really how to draw on paper. You would get like a pad of drawing paper similar to what a comic book artist would use, 3 different thickness markers. And he would teach you how to draw lines, parallel lines, dotted lines, and whatever. And the idea was that you would be able to sketch very simply but straightforward any sort of idea that you had for how, let's say, a Gmail inbox would look. And people would ask him why they had to do it. And he's like, because, the idea is going right from your head into this page without being mediated through some sort of design software that's immediately going to put constraints on how you do it. Well, in the software, you can only do a line this way, or you can only do certain things this way, right? It has its rules and its laws, whereas the page is only limited by the 8x10 or whatever that page is. And so I think for a lot of the creators that you speak with, I imagine that that's what they're experiencing, right? That there's all sorts of wonderful illustration programs you can create comics on. And many people do, but you're still limited within that software to what you can do. Whereas on paper, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't go over the edge of the page. And if you go over the edge of the page, then, hopefully there's more paper there to catch it.
Sure. I want to ask you about advice then. I mean, you've seen a lot of technologies come and go. Should we become Luddites and just throw our spanners into the gears and just do away with everything? What are your advice on new technologies we're going to experience in the future? Because there will be more.
As we speak over this newish or not even that new technology. No, you have to be open-minded, but you have to be sort of honest and rigorous in what you're going to do. So don't adopt something out of fear. And I think now with AI, there's this like, you have to learn how to do this or you'll be obsolete. It's like, you got to, tinker, figure things out and see what works for you. And if something works for you and it makes what you do, whether it's your work, whether it's education, whether it's your personal life, whatever it is, if something makes that better and it's more effective for you or more efficient for you or more pleasurable for you, then great, adopt it. But if there's something that you find makes things worse or more difficult or trickier, then you have choices out there. For example, like my daughter was talking about buying something. She's like, just get it online. Just get it online. It's clothes because she's 12. And it's like, we've ordered her so many clothes that then don't fit. And you have to go do it. It's like, no, we are not like, we are going to a store and you're going to try this stuff on because we've done the experiment with you in online shopping and it does not work. It is not an efficient, like it's net negative for all of us. And so you have to think of it in that way. Like all these things are just tools and they're created for a purpose, but the tool may not work for you or it may not be what you want at the end of the day. The only way to find out is sort of experiment with it, be honest with the way you experiment. And so for a comic book artist, if you're someone who's grown up using digital, let's say you're a younger artist or whatever, like go get a pad of paper and some pens, go to an art supply store and just muck around and see what comes of it. You may still end up using your tablet and digital stylus to create at the end of the day, but maybe you've gotten some new ideas or techniques out of playing with analog, out of playing with paper. And the opposite, if you've always used paper, give digital software a try, at least to see what things you may be able to do. Most people use a combination of these different technologies. They might draw something on paper and then capture it and then edit it afterward in a computer or in software because you can do that, where it's very hard to edit a comic book just using paper, right? Like it's a lot of scissor work involved. So I think you have to try those things and see what comes out of it, see what happy accidents occur. Where does a splotch of ink falling actually add to something? And I think about Canadian comic artists, like someone like Jeff Lemire. The inkiness of his work is so distinct in the look of it. It really is what makes it Like it's so tactile and visual. And that's something that, in digital, you just wouldn't get. That's a part of that look. So it's like, what do you want out of it? What do you want from that look? How do you want your work to look and feel?
Cool. So we've been talking about the future as analog. I'd like to know, what are you working on next? Is there anything that you can talk about?
Nothing that's in the pipes in this way, so to speak. I'm working on another project sort of for hire that's something different. But I've been thinking about reading a lot in the same vein because it's something I think I want to investigate. Like reading is something that people have been doing less and less for pleasure, and certainly with books. And yet book sales in certain areas like kids and stuff have been growing a lot. Graphic novel sales, right? Comic sales, they've been doing well. And so there's this interesting tension where people want to read more and they want to read more in paper, and yet they're sort of stuck looking at their phones. And then it has these spurts of growth. I don't know. There's something there to investigate. So that's where my mind's headed, but I haven't done anything about it yet.
Very good. For people who want to find out more about your current and your future projects, where do you recommend they go online?
Oh, God, nowhere. I don't know. I got off social media quite a while ago. So get out in the world. I do have a website I haven't touched in years. Yeah, I'm terrible at this stuff, but I guess it's on brand. So
thanks to David for the chat. You can discover more about David Sax online at saxdavid.com. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to more conversations about creators and their insight about making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.